The first man in this story was not a medicine peddler. He is the president on U.S. postage stamps. The first drug route we will talk about is not an alleyway. It is a transoceanic route. What about the first drug lords? Their names are engraved in marble at Ivy League universities. Today, in the United States, you can go to jail for selling a few grams of drugs. But a century and a half ago, some of America's most respected families moved tons of opium into China and built dynasties from the profits. Their descendants later became presidents, senators, media moguls, and university benefactors. We passed buildings with their names on the walls. We called them founding families, industry leaders, visionaries. Hardly anyone mentions where their seed money comes from drug trafficking on an imperial scale. In this documentary, we open the notebook they hope you'll never read. We will be watching the silver flow out of China and into homes in Boston and New York. We will see how the drug fortune was laundered through charity and prestige, and we'll be entering into the silent hypocrisy of a country that got rich by poisoning another country, then turned around and declared a righteous war on drugs at home. This is the story of how America's aristocracy was built on drugs, and once you see it, you will never look at certain families or certain universities the same way again. 1. Invisible drug lords. Visual signals. Close-up of a modern prison cell door slamming shut, framed by a gilded 19th century oil painting of a stately merchant. There are people today serving decades in prisons in the United States for heroin trafficking. But in the early 1800s, American merchants were shipping box after box opium to China, and the only bars they saw were mahogany-paneled ones. They were not outlaws. They were the ancestors of an American president has led the country through its greatest crisis since the Civil War, the richest man in America. A magazine empire still shapes business culture. Societies at Yale have trained presidents and CIA directors. Old, wealthy families in Boston and New York still keep their surnames. Their drug trafficking was not a side business. For many, they are core engine-generated capital, which was then invested in railways, real estate, banking, and communications. And the profits are huge. A single trip can bring 400 to 500% give back. You buy cheap opium in India or the Ottoman Empire, ship it in bulk to the Chinese coast, and resell it for many times the price in silver. Silver has melted out of Britain, and Americano pay for tea and Chinese porcelain, which is now flowing back. Carried by men your history teacher might have mentioned with reverence. To understand how this can happen, we need to zoom out, because this is not just greed. This is the solution to the core economic problem of the British Empire. 2. Drug triangle, UK, India, China, USA. Visual signals. The map of Eurasia gradually moves to show arrows. Silver from England to China, then opium from India to China. Silver back to England and America. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Britain had serious problems with China. The British upper and middle classes are obsessed with Chinese products. Tea for everyday life, silk for fashion, porcelain to have prestige. But the Chinese court had a simple answer when European merchants showed up with British goods. We don't need them. China will accept silver and only silver. So year after year, British ships left London and other ports laden with precious metals and returned with cargoes full of tea and luxury goods. On the ledgers in London, the results were devastating. One large trade deficit. Silver reserves are decreasing. For an empire whose monetary prestige depended on its precious metal reserves, this was indeed dangerous. Britain needs something, anything, that the Chinese people can buy in large quantities. They found it in a flower. In British-controlled India, large tracts of land were converted into opium plantations. Indian peasants, under colonial supervision and forced contracts, grew opium instead of food. The East India Company purchased the raw product, processed it into a concentrate, packed it into standard barrels, and auctioned it to private merchants. According to official regulations, opium was not allowed to be imported into China. Chinese law forbids this. The imperial government knows it is dangerous, but profits do not care about legality. When law enforcement is weak and profits are high, British merchants would bring opium to the Chinese border, anchor offshore or in semi-legal coastal areas, and handed over to Chinese smugglers to transport to the mainland. Silver flowed back to these foreign merchants, then back to India and England. The direction of the trade current reverses. At this time, China was losing silver, and Britain was gaining silver. This is where American merchants saw opportunity. In the early 1800s, America was a young republic with a small navy, but a growing shipping industry. Shipbuilders have designed some of the fastest sailing ships in the world, cutting machine-long, narrow hull with tall mast, built solely for high speed. Speed is of the essence when smuggling contraband. The American captains realized they could penetrate the Anglo-Chinese drug corridor, sail from New England to British India or the Middle East. Opium was purchased, sometimes through British partners, sometimes independently from local suppliers, race across the Indian Ocean and South China Sea to a prearranged anchorage off the coast of China. Meet Chinese middlemen at night, transfer opium and receive silver in response. Use that money to buy Chinese goods, or take it home to make a profit. In theory, U.S. ships typically avoid docking at restricted Chinese ports. They linger on the fringes, in the gray areas of authority, maintaining a thin layer of plausible deniability. But their hulls were still full of drugs. These numbers are staggering. By the 1830s, American companies controlled nearly 1/10 of opium flooding into China. British companies handle much of the rest, but U.S. merchants are not small players. They are vital links in the chain. Just one successful trip can turn a humble family business into a rising dynasty. And that's exactly what happened. If you follow the silver coins from the Chinese pipes back across the ocean, they will end up on the desks of specific men, in specific counting rooms. Men like Warren Delano. 3. Delano Roosevelt Pipeline. Before there was President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, has Warren. Delano II, his grandfather Warren began his career as a young office worker in Massachusetts, sent to another part of the world to work in the China trade. He came to a port city that Westerners called Canton, Guangzhou, a bustling place with many warehouses, foreign factories, and middlemen. He did not join any company. He climbed the ranks of Russell & Company, an influential American trading company in China, has extensive opium business operations. Day in and day out, Delano's world is filled with ledgers and letters, shipping schedules from India, updated opium and tea prices, lists of trusted Chinese intermediaries, calculations of coastal patrol risks, and the changing moods of imperial officials. When a chest of opium left an Indian depot, Warren might not touch it with his own hands, but he knew exactly how much silver it would bring if it reached the right bay in the Pearl River Delta. For more than 13 years, through prosperity and recession, he helped steer Russell & Cober through one of the most profitable and morally toxic businesses in the world. When he finally returned home, he did not come as an office worker. He came back as a rich people. With his drug money, Warren Delano could afford a sprawling mansion overlooking the Hudson River, prestigious schools, and private tutors for children, a life of ease among the New York and New England aristocracy. Then a financial crisis hit back home in one of America's periodic panics that wiped out fortunes overnight. Delano's investments were ruined. He was technically bankrupt, so he did what any rational 19th century drug dealer would do: go back to his roots. He returned to China, returned to trading, and within a few years had rebuilt his fortune, once again tied to opium and the Chinese market. By the time he retired, the Delano family was firmly established in America's upper class. His daughter Sarah married into another old New York family, the Roosevelts. Their only child, born into this world of luxury and isolation, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the man who would later lead the United States through the Great Depression and World War II. Franklin grew up in a mansion his parents called Springwood. He was educated at Groton, a prestigious preparatory school, then Harvard. He didn't worry about the money he made on a pile of compound interest from selling a drug that the Chinese emperor tried desperately to ban in the 19th century. Decades later, President Roosevelt signed federal laws that tightened U.S. drug control and paved the way for modern drug prohibition. The irony is almost too obvious. A man's grandson became rich thanks to the opium that flooded China, helped criminalize drug use for ordinary Americans. In the Delano Roosevelt story, You can see the whole story in miniature. Illegal drug trafficking abroad, assets created in legal gray areas, wealth repackaged into mansions, education and political capital descendants rise to hold the highest positions in the country. The family's role in the drug trade is reduced to a vague footnote about trade in China, and they are not alone. 4. The Astors. From opium and furs to Fifth Avenue. When you hear the name Astor, you might think of Manhattan real estate, luxury hotels, maybe the Gilded Age. The official story goes like this. John Jacob Astor started in the fur business, moved into New York real estate, and became the richest man in America. That version is incomplete. Astor was a master of arbitrage not only in beaver pelts, but also in opium. His ships sailed to China as part of a larger trade system. On some routes, they transported Turkish opium eastward, using the drug as a highly profitable stepping stone to exploiting Chinese silver. The loop works as follows. Locked-in contracts to supply opium from the eastern Mediterranean. Shipping to the Chinese market already had British and Indian products, sold at a much higher price for silver, a metal that was extremely valuable in East Asia. Use that silver to buy tea, silk, and other Chinese goods for the Western market. Sell those goods at ports in New York or Europe, reaping double profits. Even when opium was not the only commodity, it was often most profitable links in a series of rocket boosters that turned solid trading into explosive wealth. By the 1840s, John Jacob Astor's fortune was estimated at around $20 million, a huge number at that time, equivalent to hundreds of millions today. That wealth becomes huge landholdings in Manhattan, investing in transportation and infrastructure. A family name is engraved on the hotel, library, and social club. When the Titanic sank in 1912, one of the most famous victims was a man named Astor, a member of a family whose early rise was fueled by banned opium and beaver pelts. Yet in selected biographies and museum plaques, the drug connection is barely mentioned, if at all. And again, the pattern repeats. Risky, morally toxic commercial activities abroad are transformed into respectable assets at home. Now, you begin to see that this is not a story about a bad guy family. It is one system model. Opportunistic businessmen who join the imperial drug network, make a fortune, and then rebrand themselves as respected pillars of American society. In the next section, we'll expand the lens. The Forbes family turned Chinese opium money into a railroad and business magazine empire. The Perkins family, Boston's charity kings, have a source of funding based on drug profits. Samuel Russell and the drug-funded secret society at Yale had people in the White House and the CIA. Humanitarian disaster inside China, addiction, war, humiliation. And the deliberate cover-up has turned drug lords into philanthropists in our history books. The deeper we go, the harder it is to say, we don't know. The rise of drug empire in America. While Warren Delano II was building the foundation of the Roosevelt dynasty through opium profits, another group of elite American families, calm, polite, impeccably mannered people, were building their own fortunes through the same toxic opium trade. Not in the alleys. Don't stay in a smoky cave, but across oceans behind mahogany desks, through coded letters and under the glossy veneer of legitimate commerce. Boston and New York in the 1800s were more than just centers of commerce. They have command centers of one of the world's largest international drug operations. The names we admire today, Forbes, Perkins, Russell, Cabot, Lowe, were not simply businessmen or philanthropists. They were the architects of an empire built on the suffering of millions across the Pacific. And like the British, the American elite have perfected one thing: making dirty money in Asia. Clean up your reputation in America. The Forbes Empire, the work behind America's most famous business magazine today. Forbes means power. Forbes list, billionaire, the face of American capitalism. But this dynasty began in a very different way in the cargo holds of opium ships crossing the South China Sea. Robert Bennett Forbes, the captain who carried a nation's addiction. Robert Bennett Forbes was more than just a merchant. He was a man of the sea, sailing ships loaded with cargo, rattan chests filled with opium. Each chest is of great value. His voyages resemble scenes from a nautical thriller, Moonless nights on the coast of Guangdong. Small Chinese boats with lanterns rowed out to meet his ship. Sicey silver bars were traded for sacks of drugs, encrypted signals between smugglers and merchants, and the constant threat of Qing patrol boats hunting in the shadows. Forbes knows exactly what he is selling. He knows what opium does. But the profits of 500% have a way to ease the conscience. John Murray Forbes, turning opium into railroads, land, and heritage. While Robert piloted the ship, his brother John Murray Forbes mastered the land game. He took the profits from opium and transferred them directly to New England Railroad, large-scale land acquisitions, industrial projects that made him one of Boston's most influential tycoons. The capital that will one day be created, Forbes' business empire, including Forbes magazine, was not born in a boardroom, but on a drug trafficking route off the coast of China. By the late 19th century, the Forbes family had become Boston's aristocracy. What about the drug connection? Buried under layers of charity, buildings, scholarships, charity balls, and flashy obituaries, Thomas Handesid Perkins, Boston's remarkable package, Baron. If Boston had a commercial king in the 1800s, it was Thomas Handesid Perkins. One man being honored today is a philanthropist, a patron of arts and culture, founder of hospitals and schools. But behind that noble appearance is a huge fortune built from drugs. Perkins. Gentleman poison smuggler. Perkins ran one of the world's largest drug networks in America. Opium sources from Turkey and India, transported to the coast of China, in cooperation with British manufacturers, use encrypted messages to conceal transactions. His operations were large enough to compete with British companies. Money flows like a river, from Izmir port, across the Indian Ocean, through the South China Sea, onto small Chinese boats, rowing out to sea under the moonlight. They were then shipped directly back to Boston banks as polished silver bars. Money laundering reputation, turning drug money into noble money. Perkins perfected a model that generations of elites still use today. Make money dirty. Make the image clean. Let history forget the rest. He donated a huge amount of money to, founded the Perkins School for the Blind, hospital construction support, Harvard, and Boston civic organizations sponsor churches and charities. And just like that, a drug dealer became a leader, a philanthropist, and a founder of Boston society. Each building that bears his name is not only a monument to his generosity, but to remove sins. Russell Family Drug. Fortune behind America's most powerful secret organization of all the drug families. None shape the power of the American elite as directly as the Russells. Samuel Russell, the man who made opium an American industry. Samuel Russell was not only involved in drug trafficking, he built America's largest drug company, Russell and Company. This company, transporting thousands of barrels of opium every year. Important smuggling routes are controlled, cooperation with British manufacturers in India, and became the basis for U.S. influence in trade with China. When Samuel Russell retired, he was one of the richest men in Connecticut, skull and bones. The Yale Secret Society was born from opium wealth. Samuel Russell's cousin, William Huntington Russell, founded a secret society at Yale in 1832. He funded this project with family assets, which were obtained directly from opium. That association is called Skull and Bones. It becomes the most elite and secretive organization in American education. A recruiting center for future presidents, judges, spies, ambassadors, senators, cabinet members. Among the alumni, both Presidents Bush, Supreme Court Justices, CIA, and intelligence directors John Kerry, dozens of senators and business leaders. Skull and Bones is often romanticized as a mysterious Ivy League fraternity, but its foundation is laid by drug money. When you walk past the tomb at Yale, that stone fortress is more than just a symbol of prestige. It's a monument to a drug empire that was wiped out, the Cabot and Lowe family. When old money was built on tobacco, Boston's rich people often carry with them a quiet pride in their ancestry and reputation for intellectual greatness and sophistication. But the truth is much more complicated. Families like the Cabots, the Low Points, the Peabody family, the Griswolds, all related to the opium trade in the early 19th century. Cabot House at Harvard, Lowe Library at Columbia, built on silver from addiction. Walk around the Ivy League and you'll see their names everywhere. Cabot House, Harvard Low Memorial Library, Columbia Cabot Street in Boston, Cabot Scholarship low funding. But almost nowhere can you see the truth. These families shipped opium to China, converted Chinese silver into American wealth, and used that wealth to build institutions that still shape America today. They are not anomalies. They are the norm. In the 1800s, Boston Brahmins were considered aristocratic, precisely because their money came from markets too dirty to discuss publicly. But time turns criminals into benefactors, if the criminals are rich enough. The human cost of China, the part ignorant from history books. While American dynasties rise in marble mansions and Harvard halls, China collapses under the weight of a foreign-made national addiction. To truly understand the horror, we must leave the plush drawing rooms of America and return to the realities of China in the 1830s. 10 to 12 million addicts, a collapsing nation. By the mid-1830s, an estimate 10 to 12 million Chinese people. Opium addiction. Up to 10% of adult men is a user. Some areas have addiction rates as high as 20 to 30%. Imagine, fishermen cannot work. Farmers abandon their fields. The soldiers were too addicted to fighting. Families sell their children to buy more opium. Mortgage silver to get another pipe. Villages are sinking into poverty. Drugs do not only destroy people. It destroyed the social and economic structure of one of the world's oldest civilizations. Silver sewer. Economic collapse. Before the advent of opium, China was one of the richest countries in the world. Silver flows go inside China, not out of the game. But what happened after foreign opium flooded the shores? Silver started to disappear. It poured into the hands of the British and Americans, depleting the empire's reserves, weakening the government, and destabilizing the currency. China is not just addicted. China is being economically hollowed out. Opium Cellar, a portrait of human devastation. Imagine this scene. A dark room lit by a single oil lamp. Men lay stretched out on bamboo beds, pipes resting on their chests, eyes half open, limbs hanging limp, mind wandering. A sweet, intoxicating smoke wafted through the air. Children begging outside women sell last family heirloom, coughs and soft groans. This is the market that finances Harvard houses, Yale secret societies, New York mansions, Boston libraries, and American political dynasties. Lin Zexu, the man who tried to save a dying nation. Not everyone in China is resigned to fate. Emperor Dao Guang appointed a man of rare virtue, Commissioner Lin Zexu. Lam is not corrupt, he's not afraid, and he fully understands the severity of the disaster. In 1839, he went to Guangzhou with a mission. The drug trade must be stopped at all costs. The Great Destruction at Human Forest confiscated and destroyed more than 1,000 tons of opium, a mountain of drugs worth a kingdom's worth of profits to British and American merchants. He ordered open containers, opium dissolved in salt water and lime ditches. Toxic sludge is discharged into the sea. It was one of the most morally courageous acts in modern history. A moral question that resonates through the centuries. Lin wrote a letter to Queen Victoria that was calm, dignified, but full of sorrow. If that drug is banned in your own country because of the harm it causes, why are you flooding our water with it? He never received an answer. Instead, he sent battleship, the drug wars. When drug profits are protected by Big Horse, Britain's response to China's efforts to defend itself has been anything but diplomatic. It was an invasion. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, broke out because he asked to continue selling drugs to China. China lost. Hong Kong was ceded. Huge reparations were imposed. Foreign traders gained access to Chinese ports. Drug trafficking is higher than ever, and in the dark, American companies thrive, filling the gap while British companies struggle. World War II, the final blow. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, forced China to legalization of drugs, open more gates, accept foreign control over tariffs. For Western merchants and American elites, this was a gold rush. For China, it was the beginning of the century of humiliation. For American aristocracy, it was the foundation for their rise, whitewashing, hypocrisy, and erased history. When the last opium ships stopped sailing and the silver stopped pouring into Boston and New York, America's elite families faced a new challenge, not financial, but reputational. They had built fortunes so vast that even their grandchildren would never have to work, but they had built that fortune by poisoning another civilization. And no dynasty wants its origin story to begin with an opium den. So the families did what powerful families always do. They wiped their name clean, brick by brick, building by building, donation by donation. Not through silence, but through architecture, philanthropy, and institutions that will outlive memory. Drug money, laundering through respect. When Warren Delano returned from China with his pockets full of opium smuggling silver, he made no secret of his shame. He re-entered New York society as a sophisticated businessman. He bought real estate. He funded elite education. He married into prominent families. His drug fortune didn't disappear. It metastasized into American respect. And the Delano family aren't the only ones. 1. The Astors washed off the opium smell. John Jacob Astor turned Turkish opium into American real estate. He used Chinese silver to buy Manhattan. He built Fifth Avenue properties, luxury hotels, and charitable foundations that bear his name. By the time his children and grandchildren sat in the bleachers and summered in Newport, no one dared to whisper the word opium. Astor replaced the smell of cigarette smoke in smoky rooms with the scent of luxurious living rooms and polished mahogany. 2. The Forbes family reinvents itself. The Forbes brothers, Robert Bennett and John Murray, knew exactly what they were doing in Canton. They knew the broken families and the sunken-eyed addicts. But once the money reached Boston, the drug connection evaporated. John Murray Forbes became a railroad magnate. Robert Bennett Forbes became a maritime philanthropist. Their wealth helped launch Forbes magazine, a later publication that praised American capitalism, while carefully forgetting the Chinese corpses buried under its foundations. 3. Thomas Handison Perkins, Boston's benevolent drug lord. Thomas Perkins, one of Boston's most prominent philanthropists, funded school, libraries, hospital, charities. He became a symbol of old New England virtue. But when the dust is blown off the original accounting books, a different story emerges. Each page of profit records labeled with Chinese ports, Turkish suppliers, and opium shipments. Perkins is not just rich. He is rich because millions of Chinese are addicted. And his name is still mentioned in schools today. 4. The Russell family, from drug ship to Yale's most powerful secret society. Samuel Russell founded Russell & Cart, the largest drug trafficking company in the United States. His cousin William Huntington Russell used the family fortune to found Skull and Bones, Yale's super elite society, whose membership list reads like a blueprint for American power. President, CIA Director, Supreme Court Justices, Wall Street tycoons, Senator and Cabinet Secretary. The irony is almost too great to comprehend. One of America's most secretive and influential elite networks was born from drug money. But Yale never mentioned this. The Russell Trust Society, the financial arm of Skull and Bones, still exists, still funded by privileged seats born out of the 19th century drug trade. 2. How families rewrote history. Once you have enough wealth and have built the villa, the next step is very simple. Delete the original story. And American families have proven surprisingly effective at rewriting their own past. 1. The Delano's family rebrands itself public. They were Chinese merchants, trading in tea, porcelain, and luxury goods. Private. They transport thousands of pounds of opium every year. As FDR rose to national prominence, Delano's story became increasingly sanitized. Campaign biographers spoke of his grandfather's bravery and maritime expertise, but never mentioned the drug dens, the coastal smuggling networks, or the money extorted from broken Chinese families. 2. Harvard, Yale, and Columbia erased the evidence. Walk onto the Harvard campus. Walking through Yale University. Walk through Columbia's Low Memorial Library. What do you see? Granite, marble, name engraved on stone, names like Cabot, Lowell, Perkins, Russell. What you will not see, a single plaque acknowledges that some of these buildings were built on drug-related wealth. University archivists have long avoided addressing the issue. The admissions tour never mentioned this. Fundraising flyers depicting pictures of charity donors. This is not a coincidence. It is deletion. 3. Museums, libraries, charities. America's great amnesia machine. These families understand one thing deeply. If you donate enough money to a city, that city will forget what you did to earn that money. And so they sponsored art museum, children's hospital, library, public works, park, church renovation. Their names have become symbols of kindness. Students learn about their generosity, not about the poppy fields that paid for them. The association with opium did not just fade, they buried it on purpose. The ultimate hypocrisy. Drug lords become drug policymakers. By the early 1900s, America's upper-class families had been so thoroughly sanitized, so completely absorbed into the highest strata of society, that they could reinvent themselves as moral authority on drugs. This is where the story turns from dark to almost surreal. 1. FDR, the nephew of an opium merchant. Drug suppression, Warren Delano II, made his fortune smuggling opium. His grandson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, became president and signed some of the strictest drug laws in U.S. history. Expanded drug control, Marijuana Tax Act, the original federal drug enforcement framework. Imagine a gang family funding anti-drug legislation. That's basically what happened. 2 American elites criminalized the very substances their families sell. By the 1910s, 1930s, opium fueled the wave of Chinese migration panic over opium dens. Spreads in American newspapers, politicians have taken advantage of the drug panic to pass strict laws. However, no discussion acknowledges that it was American and British merchants who first introduced opium into China. Instead, the story places moral blame on the Chinese immigrants themselves. This is the psychological trick hidden deep in America's drug history. Offenders rewrite the crime and blame the victim. 3. Family drug assets become invisible in law and policy. No senator stood up and said, "Our country's elite families have made a fortune from drug trafficking overseas. Perhaps we should look into that before criminalizing drug users." No newspaper editorial questioned whether America's moral authority on drugs was influenced by its history of aristocracy. This silence is not accidental. That is the structure China remembers, America forgets. If you walked into a Chinese class today and asked the students about the Opium War, they would tell you names of treaties, coastal cities, forced to open up, the humiliation of watching foreign troops burn down the royal palace, the devastation of China's economy. Millions of addicts, national trauma shapes modern Chinese identity. It plays a central role in their history. Now try walking into an American high school and asking, what role did the Delano, Astor, Forbes, or Russell families play in the Opium Wars? You will get blank looks. What happened was simple. China keeps the memory because it is a wound. America erased that memory because it was a crime. And the descendants of opium-growing families have benefited greatly from that eradication. Modern parallel. This story is not just about 19th century ships and old money. It involves a model, a sample of which addiction has been industrialized. The profits are huge. The damage is visible on the outside. Charity cleans reputation. The public forgets, or is forced to forget. The next generation becomes the respectable elite. We have seen signs of this pattern in pharmaceutical scandal, large-scale healthcare dependency crisis. Industries profited before regulations caught up. State agencies are slow to intervene. Corporations settle lawsuits while keeping most of their profits. Donors fund museums and universities to rebuild their reputations. The structure still has a strange familiarity, the final moral calculation. So what does all this mean? This means that the foundations of American high society, universities, museums, political dynasties, and philanthropic families are not as pure as the marble slabs that bear their names. This means that the story of American elites is not just a story of entrepreneurship and innovation. It is also a story of exploitation, a story of profit at all costs.